Isn't it a marvelous thing that the heart can sing? We sing with our lips, and our poor dumb voices we raise. But the real singing is within the heart, within the soul. And of course the angels never have to strain or exert themselves, possessing that dynamic flexibility of vocal cords made of electronic essence. As real and tangible as our own bodies, yet having the buoyancy that we ourselves once knew before we took form here in this world. We read of how the morning stars once sang together for joy, and this is far more than poetic expression. It is a version of reality, and the reality we hear within the corridors of our self, dim and like feet or voices heard at a distance, yet somehow we know it is real. Now, here is the interesting thing about life. Life is not the way most men have apprehended it to be. Life, real life, is different. Real life is a surge of dynamism. Yet, we hear the story of the great prophet in the cave, and how, as he's sitting there, there is the sound of thunder. And he saith, but God was not in the thunder. And there is the lightning, the crash of the lightning, as it burns its pathway through the air. But God was not in the lightning. And the great wind came and blew, striking terror to most hearts. But God was not in the wind. And then came the still small voice. And God was in the still small voice. So this is reality. This is the real that we have sought to capture on canvas. Michelangelo, Titian, and others. Rembrandt. And great musicians, Palestrina, Wagner, and others, have sought to capture harmonically. And they have done quite an excellent job, these old masters. Such an excellent job that today the trend toward modernism, toward progress, is away from the techniques they taught, a departure from the beauty they sought to convey. We shall not postulate tonight or express our feeling concerning modern art or music. This is not necessary. But it is necessary that we speak concerning the old masters and the things which they sought to convey, which are with us still. For a while, we have passed a Victorian age, and we have passed an age of innocence in America. We stand on the threshold of great discovery. Our science, our nationalistic intent, all that we would deem progress, is here with us in the material world of form, swift communication, rapid media contact, higher institutions of learning, marvelous job opportunities, freedom from drudgery. They are all with us. And not 6,000 years, but 1,000,000 years of culture are with us. And yet, in the midst of this all, man is still crying, why, whither, whence? Where did I come from? Where am I going? What is the meaning of life? Why is there so much political and religious strife? Why such unrest within the psyche or being of man? Why can I not find the answers now and discover it today? Why must man suffer? These questions are being asked. The answer is simple, but it takes a child mind to accept it. The intelligence refuses to accept a simple answer, and it chooses to complicate it. Yet the highest intelligence is the intelligence of the Christ mind, the Christ childlike mind. This is higher than all. It is, as we discussed this morning, the intelligence which in Jacob Behmen gave him the cosmic consciousness that took this humble cobbler in Germany years ago and raised him to a position of philosophical eminence. He was exalted, just as any man can be exalted, by God, by the Great Spirit. As Longfellow said in his poem, "Get ye Manitou the mighty, he the master of life descending, he rends the great cloud curtain." Manitou, Great Spirit. It does not matter to him what name we call him. Al-Shala, Elohim, the Father, the Great Spirit, the Eternal God, the Prince of Peace. It does not matter. Call him anything you wish to call him, but just call him. Because when you call him, he will answer. And the answer will not be some stereotyped phraseology, some stereotyped idea, some frozen religious concept. It will be an activating, pulsating flame in your own being. It will quicken you, for there are only two kinds of people on this earth, and men fall into either one category or the other, and that is the quick and the dead. Mr. Longfellow once said about the dead, he said, "They have never lived, they can wait to die." And so I think, that is methinks, that we are wasting our time whenever we approach the dead. These are the ones who know all the answers, who consider that because the alphabet has 26 letters, and because the dictionary has a finite number of words, that mere words alone, the letter, are enough to state and stipulate doctrine, to open the way to a man's soul to breathe the air of freedom and to contact his God. They think that words alone. It is not words, it is the Word, the Logos. It is not a man-made idea of Logos. It is a God-made idea of Logos, by which the heavens were framed. And as some of the great men of this century, the great theologians have said, the heavens are telling. But the psalmist said it before. And when we look at the great sidereal universe, when we see through the lens or voice of a telescope the power of infinity in space, or we look deep within ourselves into our hearts, into the consciousness that is indwelling there, we are aware of a most marvelous system, far exceeding a computer with all of its complex abilities. Last week, as I was passing through the Midwest coming from Washington, D.C., I picked up the car phone to make a call, and I wanted to get information. Directory assistance. They have a different name for it, you know, in every state. Directory assistance here in Colorado, information other places. Seems as though they're trying to confuse us. So anyway, I picked up the phone, and she said, "Where do you want to call?" And I said, "So-and-so." She said, "All right." So I heard the clicking of buttons, and the next thing I heard a voice say, 1-2-0-5-0-3-1-3-0-8-9-6. Very mechanically, it sounded like a bunch of metal plates rubbing together. And I said, "What in heaven's name is that?" to the operator. And she said, "Oh, that's the computer talking to you." I said, "You mean some human being has had their voice recorded, and the recording of their voice is cut up into little digits, and the computer selects these digits. She said, no, not at all. She said, the computer is actually speaking to you with its own voice. And so for the first time in my life, I have actually heard the voice of a computer. And it didn't sound a bit like God. It sounded like the mechanistic age in which we live. For while we are actually at the pinnacle, the relative pinnacle of achievement, insofar as material science goes, and the life processes, the biological sciences, the behavioral sciences, all of them put together, different sciences, we're at the pinnacle of it, so to speak, relatively. As far as divinity, the understanding of man himself, we are but infants. Because in my travels around this nation, and in the contacts I have made with businessmen all over this country, in fact, all over the world, I have been impressed with one thing, and I think this is probably the greatest impression that I've received from the whole world, is how quickly people are fall guys if someone will only give them a little flattery. They all want to be praised. They all are concerned with their own ego. Great fundraisers that raise millions of dollars for certain stated purposes know this, and therefore they always arrange, when they build their libraries, to say, this will be the Carnegie Library, this will be the John Jones Library, or the name of the donor. They arrange, when they have colleges and universities to receive great endowments, to call it, as they do in Denver, the Temple Buell University. People just love to have their names as monuments etched on a piece of stone to remain for future generations to gaze upon. And this indicates, and it should indicate it to you, that as Maine goes, so goes the nation. In other words, in this matter, you see, as the businessmen go, as the egoists go, so goes everybody. In other words, there but for the grace of God go I. We would all be in the same boat. We are all fall guys for this. Khalil Gibran, in his book The Prophet, pointed something out very interesting. He said, you, concerning crime and punishment, you cannot rise higher than the highest in all of us, or fall lower than the lowest in all of us. He showed then the great common denominator of reality, of what is happening in action in the world. And so the ego shows that people are actually inadequate. This egoism shows that they are inadequate. They feel frustrated. They are not expressing the God plan, the divine image. They are not understanding life properly. And they feel a compulsion to attract to themselves attention in the world of form, whether that attention comes from infamy or whether it comes from achievement. Now, some men do it because they are unable to achieve. They go out here and they do things that will attract notoriety to them, like this Richard Speck that killed all those nurses. You probably recall that. He hit the front page of the paper. Well, I contend that if the truth, the living truth, were taught by the churches in our land and in all lands throughout the world, that you would not have this blatant display of egoism. Instead of that, you would have a proper employment of the opportunities of life by people, and oh, how happy they would be to take advantage of the glorious opportunity of living, because there are 10 billion people involved with the evolutions of the earth. Of the 10 billion people, there are 3.5 billion in embodiment at one time. The other 6 billion are waiting in the wings to come in. And they can't find a body for them, and therefore they have to wait until the birth processes accelerate or something happens whereby people don't live so long, or something happens that someone vacates a body temple and they can be allowed to come in, because there is an allotment. There are lords of emigration that actually govern the functions of the incoming soul. And so your life is a precious opportunity. You are given a tremendous gift with your life. And the whole thing is, if you don't discover the meaning of life, if you don't really understand who you are and what your destiny is, you're sort of a chip on the water, and it's an awfully big ocean. But when you do discover it, it doesn't matter how big the ocean is, because you are just as big as the ocean. And this is no figment of the imagination. It's reality. You're just as big as any problem that you can have to handle, and you can cope with it. And as you accept the challenges of life and you win, you must realize that it is not just a matter of winning for yourself, the little self, but it's a matter of winning for the big self, the great I am, the presence of life. God said it is not good for man to be alone. I will make him a helpmeet for him. How many see the difference between the negative and the positive? How many see that God is the great positive pole? That the earth and life here is the womb manifestation. It's the manifestation, substance, matter. That here we see that substance is matter or matter. It's the mother, you see. And God himself then has made the creation as a helpmeet for himself, the great spirit. And that we are androgynous beings holding within ourselves the masculine power of God as the spirit of life, the animating principle, and we are material substance which needs and requires refining so that our bodies can be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, when the last trump sounds. And the last trump is the last trumpet of victory. The victory over the challenges that life makes for us. It gives us these challenges because only through accepting the challenges can we actually master our worlds and inherit our destiny. What is our destiny? I could tell you one little thing. This universe is expanding so rapidly, and the star system so rapidly, that there are any number of vacant planets waiting for a God to rule them. And the Father, you know, is not competitive. There is no competition in heaven whatsoever. When God made man, he copied himself. He made man in his own image. Now that isn't the physical. That's the spiritual self. You are a spirit encased in a body temple. And as a spirit in a body temple, you have consciousness. And the consciousness is the consciousness of the spirit, not of the flesh, which is dumb. There is no competition in God. He is so anxious to turn over a portion, a segment of the universe, or all of the universe, to this womb man, this bride of Christ that he created, that he can hardly wait. But whenever free will is given to anyone, whether it's an angel in heaven, who's supposed to be nobody in particular, whether it's an angel in heaven or it's someone made a little lower than the angels down here, God is waiting for a manifestation of himself to appear in the consciousness. But what happens? Free will gets perverted. Whenever he gives free will to any part of life, it's the gift of free will that is a prerequisite to receiving the Godhead. You see, God could not convey the allness of himself to man. He could not give his whole self to man as he wanted to do, unless man would properly exercise the function of will. And therefore he had to give free will to people. Otherwise they could never become what he wanted them to become. But that was the fly in the ointment. It was a necessary fly, though. It had to be there, and it has to be taken out of the ointment. We've got to purify the ointment of that fly. We've got to understand that the free will is a hallowed thing. That free will and freedom are holy. And that they need to be exercised properly. Now, obviously, God could not compel man to do exactly what he wanted to do. If he did, he no longer had free will. And the same was true of some of the great cosmic beings which he created. And if some of you think for 1 minute that there is no such being as Lucifer, disabuse yourself of that idea. There are dark and malevolent spirits in the universe, and they are legion. Oh, there's not as many of them as there are divine spirits by a long shot, but there's enough of them, probably 1/3 to 2/3. And this, of course, is the result of man's misappropriation of divine energy and his rejection of the divine gift and his feeling that his intellect is superior to the will of God, to the wisdom of God. The serpent in Eden was allegorical. The serpent in Eden was the intelligence. The serpent in Eden was the intelligence that reasoned and said to itself, why did he say that we shouldn't eat of this fruit of good and evil? Which simply means, why did he say that we should not know evil and good both? Why did he say that we should only know good? What is there about evil? Why, it just might be that if we knew evil, we would be able to control the universe. I'll bet you that that evil is a secret that God has reserved just for himself. Intellect made its own reasoning, and it decided to eat of the forbidden fruit, to drop the immaculate concept of the deity. Mine eyes are too pure to behold iniquity, says Habakkuk the prophet. So the idea was to forget the immaculate concept, to begin to see people as dual, good and evil, to look within themselves and see evil. Well, what you look at, what you hold in consciousness, the things you envision are soon produced. Meet a friend, love him, feel that he is a wonderful person, and he can do no wrong. Take this friend and decide that somehow or other there may be some lurking suspicion in your mind that perhaps his motives are impure. Perhaps he is evil after all, and he's a hypocrite. He's just putting on. And the first thing you know, you can recreate all of the evil that has been recreated from time immemorial in your own consciousness. And you no longer have a friend. You don't love him anymore because you have become an iconoclast. You have broken him down. You've torn down the idol of friendship because of the lurking suspicion in your own hearts. And I think that there is nothing worse than the fact that human beings actually suspect God of some form of perfidy. Oh, they won't admit it. People won't voice it. But when they see a child fall off a cliff, or they hear of some terrible death or happenstance, they examine the records of a hospital and they hear of the terrible sufferings of people with leukemia and various other diseases. They say to themselves, this world's a terrible place. God's a terrible God. Why does he do things like this? They do not understand that it is the free will agency power that has been misappropriated, that has caused men to create and recreate darkness. Jesus himself, he spoke on this. He said, if the light that is in thee be darkness, how great is that darkness? And so, if we knew the truth, we could separate, as the divine swan, the Paramhansa, can, the darkness from the light. We could skim it off in ourselves. And we would be very careful after a while, only to let the light in. And we'd stop the flow of the darkness. We'd say, we don't want you. Stay out. And then, you see, we could become arbiters of our own destiny. But the subtleties of the world and the machinations of evil come in through the mass mind. And they come in through our own past lives. For we have lived before. The products of this generation did not attain even the present majority of worldly wisdom and functional abilities to move the frame in a matter of 6 months or a year. Yet a child can both walk and talk in 1 year. In 12 months, in 365 days, a child can come into the world. And in 365 days can be an animated creature that functions biologically as an adult, eats adult food, walks around and talks, and has a great deal of intelligence and recognition. And some have such amazing talent that we have heard of a boy in Japan whose parents happen to be PhDs. We don't believe that the chromosomes and the genes carried this over. At 2 years old, this boy was able to compose letters objecting to war upon earth and the depredations of the adult world, which he severely criticized and hoped that they would do better. This boy wrote this letter at 2. Those of you who know our children here are aware of what our children did also at 2. So I'm not going to bring them in because I don't wish to, but that's not the point. The point is, the great musicians have been able to play the piano at 2 and 3. Why? Because they were maestros of music in the past. What difference does it make if you go to sleep in one body at night and wake up in another one in the morning? Oh, you'll forget who you were. You won't know where your home is. You won't remember your mother and father. It seems to me today in the world that the mother and father's role does not seem too important in this generation. And I think perhaps that it would be wonderful if the role could be more important, if parents could be better parents and children could be better children. But be that as it may, the destiny of ourselves comes to us from a distant past. And we have lived before and often. But this going to bed in one body and waking up in another is more or less what death really is. But why is it necessary? Why doesn't the body sustain itself? Alexis Carrel kept a chicken heart alive for 30 years in a test tube in the laboratory. Why doesn't our body cells renew? They do. What we have happening in the world is the grease factory takes care of us. French fried potatoes, hot fat, 400 degrees Fahrenheit, clog the arteries, give young people at 17 atherosclerosis. Athletes, boys in the football field, drop dead at 17 and 18. Men are dying like flies at 40 and 45. Heart trouble, clogged arteries, all types of diseases. Because the furnace inside is all clogged up. There's clinkers in the grates. The great bellows of the lungs cannot breathe. People have no life because the system of this free society puts the dollar ahead of everything else. This is ignorance. We put the dollar first. Our restaurants, the owners of the restaurants don't say, how much good food can I give for this number of dollars? But how much profit can I make? I'm not condemning any person or any organization, but I'm speaking a truth to society. They are self-indicted. I do not have to indict them. I'm a part of them. And supposedly by my presence here, I consent. But I don't, and many of you don't. And many of the world do not consent to it. But many are ignorant of it. They do not understand. So we have a very peculiar situation. People are fed an abominable diet in the world. Just now, DDT, which causes leukemia and other diseases, is finally being recognized for the villain it is. Rachel Carlson, in her book, The Silent Spring, warns of it. And now Michigan and other states in our great sovereign union here are beginning to pass laws and to ban these terrible things. Perhaps someday we will return to organic farming. Perhaps our people will once again return to Eden, to eat proper food. But perhaps again our university will be free and rid of the tribe that seek to subvert the principles of freedom to a collective society. These do not understand the law. We do not have sickness in the world because God wills it so. We do not have war in the world because God wills it so. We do not have hatred in the world because God wills it so. We have these conditions in the world because of the law of cause and effect. Every evil that men do returns to their own doorstep. And because people do re-embody, they do come back into embodiment. They have a certain karmic record. This is their own record, not someone else's. The government of heaven does not mix our records. Thank heaven for that. They know you, and they know me, and they know all people. And therefore, you cannot equalize a society and make everybody in a society equal. You couldn't do it if you wanted to. You couldn't do it by birth alone. The genes and the chromosomes of people, their inheritance physically is different. Their karmic circumstances. Some are born with a father and mother, and some are born without a father and mother, in the sense that they lose both father and mother. Our karma is different, each and every one of us. And we need not despair over it, because as Bernard McFadden said, and he said it correctly, if you don't like your life, you can always make it over. And this is truth. That's one thing God has done. So, we have to come back to the point where we can recognize the realities of ourselves. We have to know who we are and understand that the universe has judged us according to our own record. Jesus knew this law, and he stated it very clearly and succinctly. You know, the event was the anointing of his feet. She came to him with this precious ointment of spikenard, which was dreadfully costly. And she got down before the master, and she broke the ampules open, and she poured this precious ointment upon his feet, and she began to wipe his feet with her hair as an act of devotion. And he said, wherever this gospel is preached, what she has done shall be spoken of as a memorial unto her for all generations. But he also said a most significant thing. You know what it was? You see, the disciples were very upset, and some of the people around about were upset, because they were social-minded people. They thought in terms of world equality. Everybody should be equal. Everybody should be given the same thing. Well, they are. They're given opportunity. But the opportunity is to some degree overshadowed by their karma. So these people said, this ointment should not be applied to the master's feet. Why, this ointment should have been sold at public auction and the money given to the poor. The Christ looked at them, and he made one significant statement that you want to remember. He said, the poor you have with you always, but me you do not have with you always. Don't you see, dear hearts? The poor are simply the lowest dregs of society, and the rich are supposedly, economically speaking alone, the higher elements of society. And we have all, in one lifetime or another, been located on this scale. We have been rich and we have been poor. And sometimes we're poor in one lifetime because we so abused our riches in another. And then again, because we were poor in one lifetime and used what little talents we had so wisely, we are given great riches in another. Heaven knows what it's doing. And so you see, you can't create social justice entirely in a free society or in a communist society. It just simply won't work. There are too many inequities in any system. Down here below, there is only one way of bringing justice to ourselves as individuals and to society, and that is through the God presence. The God presence, following in the footsteps of the Masters, will bring us to our victory, overcoming ourselves, overcoming the darkness of ourselves. Someone said, our fault lies not in our stars, but in ourselves. And this is the truth. We ourselves should be grateful for it, that we know the truth and hear the truth, because what we may term, and I'm not going to explain how I feel about the devil, but what we may term the devil's lie is, of course, all of the palliatives in religion and philosophy that seek to justify men's conduct. The idea of someone saying, well, God loves me so much that he's going to give me a Savior to save me from my sins. He did. Your Holy Christ self. Jesus lived and expressed the Holy Christ self of his being. He was lifted up to draw men to God. But within themselves, within their own beings, men must come to know God. They cannot know God through the eyes of another, through the words of another, through the spirit of another, but only through the Spirit of the living God, through the little minute portion. As I recall it, in The Razor's Edge, the novel by W. Somerset Maugham, whom I didn't have a great deal of respect for, although he was a capable writer. In this particular book, he portrays a great spiritual teacher dipping his finger into a bowl of water and referring to the water as though it were an ocean, and referring to the ocean as God, and then brought out from the water on his finger one drop and said, there is your soul, an unseparated part of the great ocean of life. Qualitatively equal to God, to the whole ocean. Quantitatively equal to you. And in one sense of the word, our opportunities are thus. And therefore, the satanic delusion that has caused so much confusion in the world, that the churches today, many of them, have fallen into activities that are severely criticized by their own people, has been brought about through a misunderstanding of the law of karma, the law of rebirth, and man's failure to recognize the perfectly natural idea of putting on and off the body overcoat. I often wonder if the undertakers went to work on this doctrine. Sometimes I think it was written by the friendly undertaker. I just don't know. But the idea that a baby born from its mother's womb, springing from the sperm and the ovum, and the fusion, and in 9 months, the period of gestation, growing to a mature child with all of the organs, and coming forth and then assuming its place in the world once the umbilical cord is cut and the breath has come in, that this child, when he comes to the point where he is going to give up his body, when the spirit that animates the form leaves, to suspect or consider that God, who was capable of producing the babe in the first place through the system of law, would be incapable of reinfusing or taking that same spirit and putting it into another body. My mother did not believe in re-embodiment. She was horrified when she found that I did. She was a victim of the system that promoted the idea that we live only but once. And because of that idea, men are often put in terrible straits. Some of these are very interesting situations. People say they only live once. Well then, if that's true, what about the boy who dies at 3 years of age? What about the little babe, the little waxen-faced babe that lies dead in its mother's arms at birth, stillborn? What about the man who lives to be 25 and then perishes? Or the man who lives to be 110 and says that he's had 5 wives and smoked and drank heavily all his life and attributes his long life to all of his excitement and fun? Doesn't it seem to you as though there would be some equality in the eyes of God? Some equality in the longevity of a person's life? Why shouldn't we all have the same amount of time then, if such be the case? Well, you see, heaven doesn't care. Heaven winks at this because our life is not in the body. Our life is in the soul. And the soul can change garments as often as it wishes, or as often as life necessitates it. And actually, this is a great blessing. I recall having stood at various times and asked the mercy of God to take someone out of the body because of the intense pain and suffering with no hope of recovery. This is particularly true of accident victims, where they're in a terrible condition. If there is no hope, isn't it a wonderful thing that that body can actually pass through that change? Isn't it wonderful that the consciousness can leave the body and not have to remain there to feel the pang of severed limbs or eyes ripped from the sockets? Isn't it a wonderful thing that life, in its great mercy, can just gently lift the soul out of the body and then in due course of time put it sweetly into another woman's womb? My mother was particularly concerned because she said, well, I don't like the idea of my being someone else. Well, dear hearts, you can never be anyone else but yourself. You couldn't possibly be anyone else but yourself. And if you became a victim of amnesia today, God forbid, and then you recovered your memory and you married a woman while you were a victim of amnesia, as has happened, and you married and had 3 or 4 children, and then later on you got your memory back and met your first wife, well, you see, you'd really have a double life, but you'd still be the same person. So it doesn't make any difference. It's the most interesting thing when you stop and consider it. But we have to understand it according to purpose. And when we understand the Christ in the proper perspective, we have to realize that there was provision made for the salvation of man from the foundation of the world. The Lamb of God slain from the foundation of the world, the living Christ, the great priest of Melchizedek, who came and met Abraham returning from the slaughter of kings and blessed him. He was without father and without mother, without beginning of days and ending of days. He was the Logos universal. He was the Word that went forth and created all things. He was in the beginning. Before Abraham was, I am. But you see, he equates and he relates with the Holy Christ of each of us. God did not make one beloved Son in human form. He made all beloved sons in human form, and an only begotten Son in the spiritual sense that there was only one emanation from the heart of God, which was known as the Logos, or the Word. Now John brings this out clearly, if you'd learn to read it properly. He says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. I and my Father are one. Before Abraham was, I am, you see. All things were made by Him, the Christ, and without Him was nothing made that was made. Well, you see, the Christ then far antedated Jesus. And Jesus, the man, became the Christ. But you see, the thing that they have done in the time of the Emperor Constantine, now I know a lot of you don't know this history, and I know some of you do. But I'm going to have to just cut my time short. When I preach a sermon like this, I have to more or less rely on your judgment. If you don't believe what I say, why, you just have to go ahead and search your souls, and you have to search the books, the pages of history until you find out the truth. But I know what I'm talking about. It was Constantine who probably did more than anyone else, the Emperor Constantine, to actually introduce the wrong precepts into Christianity. If you can't lick them, join them. The catacombs of Rome, they were full of renegade Christians running all over. And the old gods of Rome, the pines and fountains of Rome, you know, from Respighi, the old gods of Rome, why, they were not very popular because so many people were turning to become Christians. And so Constantine, as he saw the rising tide toward Christianity, decided, I can't lick them, I'll join them. And so he became the Holy Roman Emperor Constantine, who sat on board his ship with all of his regal robes and celebrated the Mass, while the great galley slaves chained below rowed the boat through the high seas. What did they teach? They taught men to worship Jesus, to make a god, an idol out of Jesus, and to neglect the living Christ within themselves. They taught men to adore, adoremus. In their adorations to God, to Christ, there was complete disobedience and disregard of principles and of love. Because all the way down through history, we find the pages are bathed in blood. We say we are a Christian nation, and we say that we are a Christian world, and we say that this is an era of Christendom. In fact, Anno Domini, the year of our Lord, 1968. And where is our Lord today? Madeleine Murray O'Hare says that we have no right to pray even in space. And the voice of one woman can sway the mindless idiots that occupy high positions in our society. In God we trust is on our coins. The statue that we call the Goddess of Liberty holds her torch high in New York Harbor. She still cries out, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Yet this modern society compresses people like old cars under pressure through stamping presses, packs them down with the vibrations and negativity that is compounded in their world until they cannot rise. But the flame is still exalted, and the flame breathes on even though the votaries are gone. And the flame is the truth. And that's what we proclaim tonight. The Christ is within every man. He's a spark in some, and a burning brand in others. And he can be exalted in you, and he is the Savior of mankind. The man Jesus, who was the Son of God, is your elder brother. And he is not in the least offended by the concept, because truth is what he stands for. Messiah, yes. But we are all intended to be a Messiah. All of us, the whole world. Because he says, and the day shall come when men shall no longer say to one another, know the Lord, for all shall know me from the least unto the greatest. And each shall sit beneath his vine and his fig tree. And there shall be one altar, one temple, one world, but not according to the United Nations, not according to the Babylonian concept of Nimrod, not just the type of thing that you tie two cats together and throw them over a clothesline with their tails, and you have union. What kind of unity do you have? No, we don't want that. We want a union of hearts where all embrace the ideals of their divine presence. And the karmic record that we have is another essential thing that we must take into account. You and I have our own record. Here's another thing where the doctrine of re-embodiment was knocked out, and the doctrine of karma was knocked out. Because the people were saying, Pierre, are you going to church today? I'm not going to church today. I'm not going anymore in my whole life. Why not, Pierre? Because I'll go in my next life. That's why. And so, you see, the wise and crafty priests felt it essential, in order to have a livelihood. The end justifies the means, they said. So they took out the great truth because the ignorant masses were unable to cope with it. The unwashed masses did not understand the law, and they did not try to convey it to them. They were incapable of conveying the law because they themselves didn't live it and they didn't know it. At that particular time, there were probably more souls made inside the nunneries than there were saved. And this then points out what was going on. Corruption was in the church. It was everywhere. Today we have a better world. We have a better world today than we had back then. And you know something? We have the most terrible illusions about history. We think because we love Jesus, because we love God, because we have respect for truth, we think they lived very wonderfully back there. I tell you, the time of apostasy was really a dark age. And it did invade the church. And then, you see, it also pointed out the picture of an angry God. This angry God was always full of wrath, the God of wrath, of lightning and of thunder. He was constantly seeking to throw the souls of men into a hell from whence they could never extricate themselves. That was a God of love. Yet you and I know that there are many people today in the world, fathers and mothers, who have had their daughters come home to them, all saint, and with child, and without the benefit of a wedding ring. And these parents have accepted that errant child, the errant girl, back into their home. Some of them have even raised the child and walked proudly down the street with their grandson, who in the eyes of many in the world wasn't so grand at all. Well, you see, this makes man much better than God. He can forgive, but God is a God of wrath who will cast people forever. This is not true. It never has been true. The hells that men make are pointed out, I think, quite beautifully by this great writer, Omar Khayyam, who said, I sent my soul through the invisible to spell some word of the hereafter, and by my soul returned to me and said, I myself am heaven and hell. We ourselves are either heaven or we are hell. And this is where I must say that I could not explain tonight every facet of this to the satisfaction of all minds. But give me any man or any woman on this earth who will listen and who will leave aside their illusions and confusions, and I will show them the law that God has revealed to me and to us clear, that shows that this universe is a place of great beauty, intense beauty, that this world would not be the way it is today at all if the truth had been exalted, that the church has been invaded years ago, and as a result, many of the ministers today are taught from a child the lies of the serpent. They are taught that we live but once, and then that we die, and that's the end of us. And we are weighed then according to that life, and if we are good, we're going to heaven, and if we are bad, we're going to the other place. That's what they're taught. But God has given man many, many chances. Reminds me of the story of the young serviceman who went overseas, and when he got to the port of embarkation, he was very, very worried about his trip overseas and the fact that he might not come home to his mother and father. And so he was telling his friend about it, and his friend got very concerned, and he said, well, I wouldn't worry too much, he says, because when you get to POE, and he says, we're here now, of course, but he says, when they give you the final physical, you'll have two chances. Either they'll send you over or they won't. And he says, even if you get overseas, he says, you'll still have two chances, because he says, either when you get over there, they'll send you to the front, or they won't send you to the front. And he said, if they send you to the front, he says, you'll still have two chances, because he says, if you get to the front, either you'll get killed or you won't get killed. And he says, even if you get killed, you've still got two chances. So basically, this is the whole situation in a nutshell. I mean, we don't have an angry God. You know who gets the most angry with you when you do wrong? I'm going to tell you who gets the most angry with you when you do wrong. You do. You get angry with yourself. You are the most wrathful God in all the universe with yourself. I heard a man say the other night. He said, I don't care what you were. It's what you are today that I'm concerned with. And this is something we should actually remember for ourselves. It doth not yet appear what we shall be, but we shall see him as he is. And when we see him as he is, we shall be like him. And that's the prerequisite of being like him. You have to see him as he is. That's why I'm telling you these things tonight. Because this change of garments, this different embodiments, this is not a problem at all. It's no problem to God. No more problem to put you in another body than it would be to put you together in the first place. No problem at all. And it's much better than going to Hades. And it's really an opportunity, a continuation of opportunity. However, one of the worst things the church ever did was to teach the doctrine of sin the way they teach it. Because that's responsible for more sin than anything else. If you don't believe it, you take a man who's in debt, and he's so badly in debt that he doesn't know what in the world's going to happen to him. He's on the verge of bankruptcy. That man will go out, if he's got a credit card, and buy more stuff on his credit card than anyone else. Because he knows he can go into bankruptcy, and he can get right out of the whole thing. Jesus paid it all. All to him I owe. Sin had made its crimson stain. He washed it white as snow. And you go to St. Peter. St. Peter comes out and he says, after you have once received divine grace, he says, then you have only to look forward to a certain fiery judgment which will come upon the ungodly. I am not belittling the law, but I think the crime fits the punishment, or the punishment fits the crime, as however you want to say it. I think that a man has to have some intelligence to know that he has erred. If a man ignorantly errs, I consider that the laws of God will bring to his doorstep recompense. But it will not be the same recompense as for the one who knowingly errs. And I think also that the one who knowingly errs does not really know the truth either, and is in a certain amount of ignorance. And therefore he too is given a certain amount of mercy. But I do not believe that mercy endures forever, although the mercy of God endures forever. I believe that his soul, his spirit, will not always strive with flesh. I believe that if a person continues in wrongdoing over and over again, that they can lose their soul or be a castaway, that they can pass through the annihilation ray, that they can pass through the change called the second death, and cease to be and not re-embody. Yes, I believe that, and I know that to be true. For we also know that this occurred with Adolf Hitler. And it has occurred with others. People whose karma was so great that if they went through the whole Sisofric round, they would probably be unable to pay it off. I will say this, that the people who lead a life of happiness and joy and peace, where they have families with few deaths in it, few tragedies, many times are people who have merited great rewards. There's a place in the Bible where it says that no man that loses for the kingdom of heaven's sake his life, or where he loses his wife, or he loses his children, he gives up this and that and the other thing, it says shall actually lose this, because he says, I will give him manyfold of houses, of land, of children, and so forth. Well, you figure out how you're going to get that unless you have more than one life. So you see, when you understand the Bible as God said it, not just as it's been interpreted to you by your parents, not just as some preachers told it to you, but as it really is. And that's why I'm telling you these things, because you see, you have to discover it for yourself. I can tell you things that will clue you in, but you have to be able to put it together. It's not a matter of accepting me or rejecting me. It's not a matter of accepting or rejecting what I say, or of accepting or rejecting what someone else says. It's a matter of understanding what is truth. So tonight we're not dealing too much with the Masters, we're dealing with you. But oh, what a wonderful story the Masters are. What a wonderful story hierarchy is. What a wonderful story the divine flames are. What a wonderful story truth and the history of truth is. But it can't all be told in a nutshell. It can't all be told in a few words. We can touch it lightly, as we have done tonight. But it can inspire us to seek further, to learn more, and to realize the laws of God.